All right, buckle up for this one, because today we are diving headfirst into a case that's going to leave you scratching your head.
Oh, yeah. This one's a doozy.
It's called The Murder of Judith Roberts, and it's about this cold case from, like, way back in 1972.
And it is so much more than just your average whodunit.
Oh, for sure. We're talking wrongful convictions, some seriously questionable police work, and even a possible link to, get this, the Yorkshire Ripper.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up.
I know, right? It's like a real-life thriller.
What really drew me into this book, though, was how it goes beyond just, like, the surface level of the crime. It actually delves into how, well, basic forensic science was back in the 70s.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, can you imagine trying to solve a murder without DNA evidence?
Practically the Dark Ages. It makes you appreciate how far we've come, but also makes you realize how much they were working with back then.
Absolutely. So to set the stage for everyone, we're in 1972, and 14-year-old Judith Roberts disappears while she's on her usual bike ride.
This was in Staffordshire, England, by the way.
All right, thank you. Staffordshire, England. And a few days later, well, they find her body.
And it's not pretty. The book doesn't sugarcoat it. It really goes into detail about the, the brutality of the crime scene. It's tough to read, but it just emphasizes the gravity of what happened to her.
Definitely. And it's here that the case takes this crazy turn. A young guy, Andrew Evans, ends up confessing to the murder. But, and here's the kicker, Evans had a history of mental health struggles.
And the book does a really good job of making you question whether his confession was actually, legitimate.
Yeah, like, was he actually guilty or was something else going on?
It makes you wonder, especially when you learn about the interrogation techniques the police were using back then.
Which, let's be honest, weren't exactly ethical by today's standards.
Not even close. I mean, they didn't even bother to make sure Evans had a lawyer present.
You're kidding. No lawyer. That's insane. But, okay, even if we put the whole confession thing aside for a minute, there was practically zero physical evidence linking Evans to the crime scene.
Exactly. And the book lays out all these inconsistencies, and you just find yourself questioning everything.
It's like, who did it then?
Right. And the authors clearly did their homework. They interviewed people involved, went back and looked at the evidence with a fresh perspective. It's really impressive.
It sounds like they were determined to get to the bottom of this, even after all these years.
Absolutely. And that's where this whole Yorkshire Ripper connection comes into play.
Yeah, I was just about to say, we've got to talk about that. So for those who might not know, Peter Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, was this, well, horrific serial killer who terrorized England.
And the book draws these really unsettling parallels between his MO and the details of Judith's murder.
Which makes you think maybe they were looking at the wrong guy all along.
It's definitely a possibility, especially when you consider that at the time of Judith's murder, Sutcliffe wasn't even on their radar.
He was still out there committing these terrible crimes.
Exactly. And the authors actually dig into this even further. They start looking at other unsolved cases from around that time period, cases that, well, might have Sutcliffe's fingerprints all over them.
So are they saying he could be responsible for even more murders than he was convicted of?
It's a rabbit hole. And trust me, it gets even more intriguing in part 2. Wait until you hear what they uncovered about Sutcliffe's movements back then. It'll send chills down your spine.
I can't wait.
Welcome back, you guys. So before the break, we were talking about how the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, was completely off the police's radar when Judith Roberts was killed.
It's crazy to think about, right? Like, while this innocent guy, Evans, is stuck in prison, Sutcliffe is out there, just starting his reign of terror.
It's pretty messed up. But what really got me was how the authors of this book, they start looking at all these other unsolved cases.
Oh, yeah.
And they find all these potential connections to Sutcliffe. Like, for example, they talk about this case, the murder of Jacqueline Ansel Lamb back in 1970. She was found with these horrific head injuries, really similar to Judith. And get this, her body was hidden in almost the exact same way.
Hold up. 1970. So this was even before Judith.
Yep. Talk about a pattern, right? And there's another case, Barbara Mayo. She disappeared in 1970 while she was hitchhiking. They found her body and it was posed, which later on became like a signature thing for Sutcliffe.
Oh, wow. I mean, you have to wonder, are there even more cases out there that just haven't been linked to him yet?
That's exactly what the authors are getting at. They make a really strong case for it. Like, for instance, they uncovered this information about Sutcliffe spending time in London.
London. Wait, that's nowhere near where Judith was murdered.
I know, right? But his girlfriend was going to college in London, so he was down there pretty often.
Hmm.
And, while he was there were actually several unsolved murders that happened in London that, well, they kind of look a lot like Sutcliffe style.
Like the ones you just mentioned, Ansel and Mayo.
Exactly. The authors even found specific details from witness statements back then, descriptions of the guy, descriptions of the car he was driving, and it all lines up with Sutcliffe and the vehicles they knew he owned.
Wow. So he wasn't just sticking to one area then.
Nope. Which, kind of changes the whole game, doesn't it?
Totally.
Oh, and it gets creepier. The book talks about how, get this, Sutcliffe was actually questioned by the police in 1969.
So 3 years before Judith was killed.
Yeah. He had attacked a woman with, get this, a brick in a sock.
A brick in a sock. Seriously.
Yeah, pretty brutal. And obviously at the time they didn't connect it to his later crimes, but when you look back, it's like, hello, red flag much.
Like, what if they had taken that incident more seriously?
Who knows? Maybe things would have been different for Judith and all those other women. It's just, it's frustrating, Especially when you think about how back then, different police forces, they don't really talk to each other that much.
No internet, no shared databases, nothing.
It's crazy to think about now, but yeah. And the book really points out how that lack of communication, it probably helped Sutcliffe stay under the radar for so long.
Oh, absolutely. There's one detail from the book that I can't get out of my head.
Well.
The part about Sutcliffe owning a maroon Ford Escort.
Mm-hmm. Why? What about it?
Well, didn't some of the witnesses in Judith's case mention seeing a car like that around the time she disappeared?
You have got to be kidding me. That's right. I'd forgotten about that. Several witnesses reported seeing a maroon car, possibly a Ford Escort, hanging around the area where Judith was last seen.
Are you serious? That can't be a coincidence.
It's definitely creepy, right? The authors don't say it's proof or anything, but it's just another one of those details that makes you go,
It definitely adds another layer to all of this. The authors really did their research, didn't they? Did they ever figure out if there was any evidence left from Judith's case? Stuff that could be tested now.
They actually sent in Freedom of Information requests to the Staffordshire police.
And did they get anything?
They were pretty secretive about it. All they said was that they still had some information from the case.
Well, that's something, I guess. It's hard to imagine what it must be like for Judith's family, to still not have answers after all these years.
Especially with all the advancements in DNA technology. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if they could use that to finally solve some of these cold cases, especially the ones that might be connected to Sutcliffe?
Right. There has to at least be a chance, right?
The authors actually talk about that in the book. They really push for using these modern techniques to re-examine the evidence. Who knows what they might find?
It gives me chills just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like, maybe, just maybe, they could finally get justice for Judith after all this time.
It would be incredible. But even if they never find that, that one piece of evidence that solves everything, this book, it still does something really important. It makes us question things like, what really happened? Did the justice system get it right? And it reminds us that, we can't just forget about these victims. We owe it to them, to their families, to keep searching for the truth.
Man, this whole thing is it's a lot to process. We've got wrongful convictions, a possible serial killer connection, a justice system that, let's face it, messed up big time.
I know. It's heavy stuff, but that's kind of what makes this book so captivating. It's not just about the crime itself. It's about, human nature, how our memories can be flawed and how important it is to keep fighting for justice no matter how much time has passed.
And speaking of fighting for justice, the book doesn't just stop at the whole Sutcliffe theory.
Yeah.
It actually goes on to talk about what happened to Andrew Evans after he was finally released from prison. And well, let me tell you, it's just as heartbreaking as the rest of this story. So we were talking about Andrew Evans and how even though his conviction was overturned, his story doesn't just have a happy ending.
No, not at all. The book really goes into his life after prison and, well, it's rough. The authors don't shy away from the difficulties he faced trying to rebuild his life.
25 years. That's a huge chunk of your life.
It's hard to even fathom. The world had changed so much while he was locked away.
Yeah, the book even talks about how he struggled with everyday things, like using technology, things we take for granted. Can you imagine?
And then there's the emotional and psychological impact. The trauma of being wrongfully convicted, the anger, the feeling of betrayal. The authors really capture all of that.
That's heartbreaking.
It really is. It just shows that even when justice is served, the scars can run deep.
Yeah, justice delayed is often justice denied, right?
Yeah.
But there was one thing about Evans that really stuck with me. Even after everything he went through, he became an advocate for other people who had been wrongfully convicted.
He did. It's amazing, isn't it? He could have easily just retreated from the world, but instead he used his experience to try to help others.
Like he had this fire in him. It's inspiring. The book also spent some time talking about the media and how they covered Evans's case.
The media, oh yeah. They play such a complex role in these kinds of stories.
For sure. Like, in the beginning, the way they reported on the case probably even contributed to people believing Evans was guilty.
Absolutely. They have so much power to shape public opinion. But then you also see how the media was instrumental in bringing attention to the problems with the case, which eventually helped get Evans released.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But even with Evans being exonerated in this whole Yorkshire Ripper theory, Judith's murder is still officially unsolved.
Right. And for her family, that must be incredibly difficult to not have that closure.
I can't imagine.
The book acknowledges that, and while the authors don't claim to have all the answers, they do make a strong argument for reopening the investigation using all the forensic tools we have now.
Yeah, like with DNA technology, maybe they could find something they missed before.
It's definitely possible. And even if they don't find that definitive piece of evidence, this book does something really important. It reminds us that we can't let these cold cases be forgotten.
It's like a call to action, right? To keep searching for the truth, no matter how much time has passed.
Exactly. So to everyone listening, if you're into true crime or if you just want to read a story that will make you think, check out The Murder of Judith Roberts.
Seriously, it's such a compelling read, and it really highlights how important it is to question everything, especially when it comes to the justice system.
And how crucial it is to remember the victims.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And until next time, keep those minds curious and those lights on.
You never know what's lurking out there.